Welcome to Aflame for Christ, homilies to set your heart on fire with love for Jesus Christ. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut, and you've joined us on this 33rd Sunday of Ordinary Time. In 1907, a book was published that shocked the literary world. It was the first ever dystopian novel, kind of picturing the future instead of in rosy terms, but rather in very bleak terms. And it was called Lord of the World. It was actually written by a Catholic priest, Monsignor Robert Hugh Benson. And in the story, it talks about a Catholic church that's very persecuted and has to meet underground in secret because of the one-world atheistic government that was headed by a man named Felsenburgh. And Felsenburgh wasn't necessarily an evil man, but he was a man whose motto is, God is man, the idea that human beings are now the new divinity, kind of seeking to build a post-religious culture. And so in the story, Felsenburgh hears about this false rumor that the Catholic Church is trying to assassinate him. And so he goes on a bombing blitz trying to destroy the church by dropping bombs on Rome. So the Pope flees to Nazareth and the one world government follows him there. But of course, the Pope has no armies. He has no weapons. So towards the end of the book, he simply places the Eucharist in a monstrance and begins processing through the town, begging God somehow to rescue him with all the other cardinals that are still left in the Catholic Church. But as these fire bombers are coming in, about ready to drop the bombs on the Pope as he's leading this Eucharistic procession, the book very suddenly and drastically ends with perhaps the most evocative words in the history of literature. It ends with this statement: "Then this world passed away, and all the glory of it. Then the world passed away with all the glory of it." It was Christ's second coming. And when he came, everything that was not belonging to Christ was destroyed. You know, my friends, someday all of the world values will pass away. And think about it, right? Where were all the tyrants who persecuted Christians? Where are all the celebrities in history who, in their ego and vanity, thought themselves above the common horde? Where are all those politicians and those businessmen who lied and cheated and stole their way to the top? Thus passes the glory of the world. They're no longer around. In today's gospel, Jesus' disciples were marveling at the fine art that covered the temple. But within one generation, the temple itself would be completely destroyed by the Romans. The only part that was still standing would be the Western Wall, also called the Wailing Wall, because Jewish men and women still travel to that site to weep over the loss of their temple. And so, this will happen to all things that glorify man but don't glorify God. In our first reading, Malachi speaks of destruction, but of whom? Of all the proud and all evildoers. You see, God cannot allow evil to triumph over the good forever. There must be a time when all things that don't belong to God are conquered once and for all. You know, throughout history, we've seen glimpses of that. In 1675, Pope Urban VIII, who was originally from the Barberini family, ordered that the bronze on the Pantheon be dismantled and brought to St. Peter's Basilica, because he said to himself, well, why do we need this pagan temple that's decorated so beautifully here in Rome? And so that bronze then was melted down and cast into that very famous bronze baldacchino, the canopy that covers the main altar of St. Peter's Basilica. In fact, it's kind of funny, the Romans would famously exclaim, you know, what the barbarians didn't remove from Rome, the Barbarinis did in taking down that facade there. But then the Pope took that ancient temple and reconsecrated it into a Catholic church. Instead of a pantheon dedicated to all the pagan gods, pantheon meaning all the gods, it became a church dedicated to Mary and all the saints. My friends, all that does not glorify God will be transformed into something that does. So it is good for us to evaluate all things in light of that principle. Thus passes the glory of the world. And if it's not of God, it will pass away. Think about it, right? All those riches that we strive for, what do they matter? What are they going to matter in 100 years? Our good looks, how quickly they pass away. The awards, the sports trophies, stuff that we're willing to go to great lengths to achieve. Nothing's going to be remembered after we die. I was speaking with a young man in high school this past week, and I said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he said, I want to be an entrepreneur. And I said, well, that's a great, noble thing, but why do you want to be an entrepreneur? And he said, because I want my name to be remembered forever. My friends, think about this. Since the beginning of human history, according to Google, there's been about 117 billion people that have walked this planet. How many of those are household names now? 200? 250? Out of 117 billion. So really, people that thought they were incredibly important in their own lifetime, now they're just names on a gravestone, quickly fading into obscurity. The only thing that truly remains is our eternal soul, and that will remain forever, either as an eternal glory in heaven or an eternal tragedy in hell. Back in the 1400s, crowning a new pope was quite a show. The pope would have to receive this 3-tiered gold crown that must have weighed tons of pounds, and he'd be sitting on a chair carried by 4 men to the chants and praises of the assembled throng as he went through St. Peter's Square. But starting in 1409, a new addition entered into that ceremony. A priest would hold in his hand a smoldering handful of straw, and he would stop the procession of the new pope 3 times and turn to him and simply say the words, "Holy Father, sic transut gloria mundi, thus passes the glory of the world." I sometimes wish we had that phrase plastered on sports stadiums, on concert venues, on the halls of Congress, on the doorway into Sephora. May it always be written on the hearts of every Christian, "Thus passes the glory of the world," that we may live for the only thing alone that ever endures.